to have you here, Sean. Let's just have you introduce yourself to the people, to the audience.
Sure. Sure. Hey, I'm Sean Sotero. I'm a reporter for Complex, and I guess most germanely to this discussion, I covered the Sean Combs trial.
Absolutely, yes. And you also covered the 6ix9ine trial. I mean, I guess
Yes. Yeah,
Treyway
we'll
or
get into that. But yeah, I covered the 6ix9ine trial, which is where I met our illustrious host here. Wrote a book about that called Dummy Boy, and also did a podcast about that. Reported a podcast about that called Infamous. I'm happy to give it a go and talk about my impressions, analysis, and what I remember being there.
uh-oh. So let's see if you remember this one, because there was a certain situation. Let's see. Let's start off with how it kind of started.
Yeah.
There was a talk of during the trial how Cassie kind of, I don't know if it was, now correct me if I'm wrong. I could be chopping it up and just, yeah. So I guess maybe Cassie through her mom had reached out to Puff, and there was some sort of book just with some real dirt in it, and that she was going to put it out or write a book.
Hmm.
And if she wasn't going to get paid, can you, yeah, can
Yeah,
you explain
that's
that?
true. Yep. So I don't know about the for her mom part. You may know more about that than me, but yes, like that was the initial approach was her basically saying, "Look, I'm coming to terms with, from her point of view, all of the bad stuff, all the abuse that happened to me during our relationship. And, you know, I have this book and I've written down everything that happened. And, the implication is this looks pretty bad for you." And the offer was, well, look, you can buy the rights to this book for, I think it was $20 million. That sounds,
Mhm.
to my recollection, I believe that's what it was. And he said no. And then the civil lawsuit file came in the aftermath of that.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. See if we could see if you can fill this part in for me. If this is explained anywhere in the trial.
Mhm.
Okay. How this? Because this is where Diddy fucks up at, was that the lawsuit becomes public,
Mhm.
and then he settles. If I'm not correct, maybe
It was
within a
within a
day.
day.
Legend
Yeah,
has
it was
it.
within a day.
Yeah, within a
Absolutely.
day that's
Yep.
filed.
For money,
And
we didn't know how much at the time. It's now confirmed it was $20 million.
and it's almost like a domino effect, because this opens the doors for law enforcement to come in and you know
Mhm.
just come and poke around, sniff
Yeah, as
around,
as
and
as 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 far as we know, that's the thing that kicked off the federal investigation. It obviously also kicked off countless civil suits, most of almost all of which are still sort of winding their way through the courts. They had to wait for the criminal trial to finish up before they could really get going. So yeah, that
right.
was the thing that kind of started everything for sure.
S- I guess maybe it's tough for me to ask you, kind of be like a silly question. Why didn't he just kind of once she filed, uh, pay like real like right away as soon as she filed, so this
Oh, to the
wouldn't
to
get
the
leaked
book.
out in
What
the public.
when he gets this deal about when he gets the thing about the book? I mean, look, you'd have to ask him. You get him on
Yeah,
the you get him on the show. You know,
yeah,
you can ask him. But look, I think he has. If you let me add the caveat that to all of this is that he was found not guilty on the most serious charges,
right,
and so the jury didn't buy. It's hard to tell exactly what the jury thought. The only one who's given an interview, as far as I know, is an alternate who wasn't there for the deliberations. But you
right,
know, he was found not guilty on a lot of this stuff. But if you believe the testimony, he has done a lot of stuff for a lot of years with minimal consequences. So,
right.
there, from his point of view, perhaps if you believe he did a lot of this stuff that the testimony said he did, why would you pay someone $20 million? You've made it to your 50s without really facing consequences. So, why do you think it would start now? Why should you give up, you know, a, a not insignificant chunk of money, even for him. You know, and look, if there's one thing I've found out as a reporter, it's that if you pay someone for something, that doesn't stay secret very long. And, you know, presumably he thought it would invite other people coming to him and saying, hey, pay me for this, or I'll write a book too. I'm not saying the details would have leaked out, but the fact that he paid,
it kind of
you know, 8 figures, is that the right number? Yeah, 8 figures. That I don't think that would have stayed secret for long, and probably would have. He thinks, you know, I could imagine it inviting other people to approach him with the same sort of deal.
Right. Well, it kind of happened anyway. Everybody just came out the woodwork and sued him. Hey, I tripped on a banana peel, and it was Diddy's fault. I deserve to get paid.
To be clear, like a lot of these suits are alleging very, very serious behavior, and so it's not I tripped on a banana peel. It's you sexually assaulted me, right? There's a difference there. So let's you know. There have been a small number of the suits, like the one that alleges a tunnel, that obviously are put out by people who are not altogether there, right?
Right.
But you know, people can say it's pretty easy to sue someone in state or federal court, right? There's not a bar to entry particularly. So if you have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of suits, you know, there's a chance that, particularly with a public figure, there's a chance that some minuscule amount of them are going to end up being by people who aren't well and are sort of wholly imagining stuff. But, you know, a lot of them are still playing out. So, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let's go back and let's talk about that, because before even the trial started, when he got arrested and the investigation came in, you got so many things that came on a lot, just rumor from rumor to, you know, I got my aunt, she's like 50 something, not into hip hop or anything, and she's like, oh, do you know he had this secret tunnel, and he was supposedly was forcing Justin Bieber to do sexual acts. I'm just like, please get off of that. Like, I don't know how all these other celebrities get tied into it with no actual proof.
Well, there's sort of two sides to this, right?
Yeah.
And this was conflated a lot in the public imagination during the trial as well. There was the thing he was on trial for, which had nothing to do with any other celebrities except tangentially. But it wasn't, you know, the stuff that he was being accused of in the trial didn't happen at parties with celebrities. Where the parties with celebrities come in is in a bunch of the civil suits where people say, hey, I was at a party here or there, and, you know, other celebrities were there, and there is where I was drugged and sexually assaulted. That was the sort of pattern in a lot of these civil suits. I was given a drink at a party, you know, there was something in it, and I was sexually assaulted. That was the pattern in a lot of these suits. That had nothing to do with the what he was on trial for in New York, which was centered around sort of private sexual encounters, mostly in hotel rooms with paid escorts, right? Not a big party with a ton of people. So I think people just sort of saw the headlines and thought it was all sort of one big mess. And that's sort of where you get some of that confusion. And yes, to be clear, the tunnel thing, totally not true. His house in Miami was in an island. You can't really go building tunnels there. Like that's not how that works.
Right. What I was going to ask you is, because I noticed it's just, and I spend a lot. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if you spend a lot on social media like I do, but it seems
I get
like
a lot of my social media stuff from you. Like,
yeah, I'm just #1 guy when it comes to sources on social media. So. But they're exclusive. Remember, they're exclusive.
Right, exclusive. So anyway, shout out to my guys.
Yeah. But it seems like like for example, I'll go on TikTok and it seems like and these things are like created from thin air and just from folks and in these comments and they're like and I don't know why Beyonce and Jay-Z want like you see like the public wants Jay-Z and Beyonce pulled into it. Like
Mhm.
where did Jay-Z come come out of this? I don't
All
get
right.
it. Like
So
where do
so
you
the
yeah.
the Jay-Z thing, look, there were a couple there was at least one suit very early on, a civil suit, right? Not part of this criminal business, where it was, Jay-Z or excuse me, where it was Diddy and several unnamed celebrities either sexually assaulted me or were there watching while I was sexually assaulted. And as it turned out later, anonymous celebrity number one, the suit was eventually refiled and it was named as Jay-Z. Now, Jay's lawyers went very aggressively hard against this. I know because I was there at a small press conference they gave where they gave out a binder, which I have on the shelf right behind me, saying, this couldn't happen. Look at the map. The timeline doesn't match up.
Yeah.
She said she was here, but on that day, the thing was over here. They fought that very aggressively. And ultimately, the woman dropped that lawsuit, although it should be noted that she still stands by her story for whatever that's
Right.
worth. You can make of that what you want. And she says part of the reason she dropped it is because, she was scared of retribution from Jay-Z and his fans. Again, make of that what you want. She did drop the lawsuit. So that's one way in which Jay-Z got dragged into it. The other way is, as to what you're hinting, once all these sort of civil suits came in, Jay-Z is one of the most famous people on the planet, and he has had a decades-long association with Puff, right? Puff produced most of Jay's, or executive producing most of some of the songs on Jay-Z's second album, and on the American Gangster album, and Jay's appeared on Puff's songs, and they've obviously been photographed together countless times. Right. And it got to the point where in the middle of all this, Jay-Z's lawyers basically had to say at this press conference, his lawyer had to say, look, they're not really friends. Like, professional associates, sure, but they're not really tight like that. So yeah, he, to his dismay, he got dragged into this, partially by this lawsuit, but also partially just by having been publicly associated for many years and being so famous. I think, there were a certain amount of people who looked at this Puff stuff and were like, it's a conspiracy. It goes all the way down, right? Everyone famous who he's ever been photographed with, knew about it and was involved. And so that's where you get that. And it's tricky because certainly a lot of people around him knew about some aspects of his behavior, if the testimony is to believe that was pretty objectionable, but it's not, it's not a giant, it's not the giant conspiracy that I think some members of the public maybe thought it was or wanted to believe it was.
Right. And shout out to shout out to Alex Spiro. He he definitely knows how to defend his clients with
yeah, remind me, I'll show you the binder later. It's really something.
Really? Let me guess. Does it say how many times does it say because it never happened?
Right, exactly. Oh, right. You heard that audio. I forgot. That's right. You heard the audio of that. That's right.
Yep, I was gonna make T-shirts. I was like, because it never happened.
Right.
That's a hell of a because he's so aggressive, and it's just like okay, it kind of comes off as okay. Well, maybe this didn't happen. It's almost like manipulation, like hypnotizing. Right. So it never happened.
Right. Subliminal, anyway. Little subliminal stuff, sprinkling it in there for sure.
Right. But I'm sure before the trial started, as you were following the case, because I was following it.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of the pre-trial hearings for sure. Yep.
But a lot of the gossip or rumor that there was tapes and there was children on these tapes or minors on these tapes that there was committing sexual acts or Diddy was filming them or having them filmed. obviously this was not true, correct?
Right. None of that. Yeah, there was nothing in the trial that had anything to do with minors. Well, obviously lots of civil cases still playing out, some pretty extreme claims being made in some of them. We'll see. But yeah, the actual trial that he was on trial for had absolutely nothing to do with minors, 100%.
Yeah, and I
And
think the
none of
craziest
the
thing,
tapes. I mean, I didn't see any of the tapes, but
right?
the jury saw them, and we had a pretty good idea what was on them. None of them had anything to do with minors.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, 'cause I think, tell me about what you think about this one. One of the craziest ones I heard was that the baby oil that they found in his on his property was really horse tranquilizer.
No, see, that's another thing, right? That sort of got conflated a little bit in that in some of the civil suits,
Hmm.
there was stuff about, uh, some baby oil being drugged, and I don't know what happened. There must have been something in the baby oil that never played into the uh that never played at all into the criminal trial, right? And there was, so yeah, that would never, yeah,
Hmm.
that never played a part in the criminal trial at all. So like there's no way that like all of the baby oil in there, he used countless amounts in these encounters that was just baby oil. So,
Right.
yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. I've seen the photos in, his New York hotel room, in his Miami house, in the California house. He had stashes of it everywhere.
Right. 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 Yeah. Whatever happened with Lil Rod's lawsuit? Did that ever get thrown out?
I I actually don't know. As far as I know, I think it's still maybe winding its way through court. These things take a while, but
Right.
certainly, your viewers can correct me if I'm wrong on that. There are so many civil suits that it's hard to
Keep
keep
up.
track of all of them. Yeah. So
Trust me, I know.
and they all take quite a while to play
Right.
out. That one is mixed up, of course, with Tyrone Blackburn, who is an attorney who is involved in a lot of these, and is Diddy's team goes after him constantly, pointing out his shortcomings. I think he and Tony Busby are their sort of number one and number two enemies, who they spend no shortage of time telling us about their faults and mistakes.
Right. What was there was one I texted you about not too the other day about a man named Joseph
Oh
Manjar.
yes. Okay, yeah. So I read through that whole insane thing. This was a guy who basically wrote in, and he said, look, uh, I tried to get a lawyer to do something about this. I tried to get my lawyer to do something about this, and he wouldn't. So, which already there tells you a lot. So I'm writing in, and he had this crazy story about Brandon Paul, the guy who was, Diddy's alleged drug mule, right? Who
Mm,
testified at the trial. And he said, I saw Brandon Paul testify, and he said I was never a drug mule, and he was lying because oh, gosh, let me see if I can find
go ahead, take your time.
the details of this somewhere. Uh,
Take your time. We definitely need the facts.
okay, Joseph Manzaro. Here we go. So this guy basically said, "Look, I wrote to my lawyer. He didn't want to deal with this, so I'm telling you about it." Uh, so just so the record is clear, I'm going to tell you this. He said basically, "Look, I saw Brandon Paul testify, and he said that he wasn't a drug mule, and he's lying because 10 years ago, I saw him traveling on a motorcycle about 200 miles an hour to get 2 kilos of drugs. He used thermal blankets to obscure heat signatures. He said that he got the job through Christian Combs via Instagram. And then after and this is actually said, this guy does not seem okay. He said, after I saw Brandon Paul ride at 200 miles an hour on a motorcycle with 2 kilos of drugs, that same night I was at an event where I was sexually tortured, and he was there, and Diddy was there, and Jay-Z was there. And, you know, it's
yeah, outlandish.
You know, this is all, I think it's safe to say not true. I would, you know, this guy is alleging this. This guy does not seem okay. But it's an absolutely nutso declaration. And again, because sort of anyone can send anything to the court, you know, it ended up on the record as part of Diddy's case. Now, look, no one's going to do anything with it. I think, you know, the judge may read it and say, okay, thanks for sending it in, you know, appreciate it, see you later. But yeah, it is a kind of very nutso thing. I ended up, you know, I saw it and I didn't even end up reporting on it because I was just like, this guy's kind of been through enough, right? Like, you know, it's a salacious headline for something that didn't happen. You know, I again, who knows? I guess anything's possible, but I think it's pretty safe to say this particular, you know, thing is a product of this guy's imagination.
Right. It's funny, but let's run down some things that what exactly was Puff charged with? Obviously, a RICO, right?
Right. So Puff was charged with kind of 3 buckets of things, right? And a couple counts of each. So there was the racketeering, and sort of tied into that racketeering. So the racketeering had 2 parts, right? I'll try to make this sort of as quick and concise as possible. Basically, for racketeering, it was, did he run a criminal organization? And if you believe he ran a criminal organization, which crimes did they commit? And there was a whole list of potential crimes that, you know, the feds were saying he committed. So that's part, you know, everything, you know, Cuddy's car and drug stuff and, you know, any number of things, right? So that's one. Then there was 2 sex trafficking charges, one related to Cassie, one to Jane Doe, basically saying, you know, alleging that Diddy used force, fraud, or coercion, those were the terms used in the charge, to get these women to participate in these sex sessions with escorts, right? The freak-offs. And then third, and the one he was convicted on, was a violation of the Mann Act, basically bringing people across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. He is fighting that by saying, like, you know, even after he was convicted, he's fighting that by saying, well, you know, if you're bringing someone and you're not the one having sex, you're just watching, that doesn't count as prostitution, and all these sort of, you know, word games and sort of post-conviction attempts to sort of get out of it. But that was the sort of bucket of things he was convicted of, and he was found not guilty on sort of the other 2 buckets.
As far as the one that didn't make sense to me, I mean, as far as that doesn't, like, as far as, you know, crossing state lines, is the one with the Punisher. And because they would be in I think a Trump hotel, because the Punisher is like he's a Harlem resident.
Sure,
you know?
But look, he's not the only one, right? There were scores of escorts, and I spent multiple days in trial watching all of the records of, they bought a plane ticket for this one to fly from Georgia to New York, or this one from New York to Turks, and, you know, Combs Enterprises paid for the plane ticket, and here's the record, and here's the credit card it was paid on. Like, They had him dead to rights on that one. I'll just say that. I'll spare you, you know, all of the
Right.
the spreadsheets that I had to watch day after day after day. But it's safe to say they had a huge amount of evidence showing that Combs and his businesses paid for escorts to travel across state lines and sometimes out of the country at times at which these freak-offs happened.
Now, okay, just to be correct, is he, as far as the sex trafficking, so he's sex trafficking the guys or the women,
So
to be clear?
the charge was that he used force, fraud, or coercion to get the women to participate. That was what he was charged with. And, you know, whatever my feelings about that,
Right.
you know, that is what he was found not guilty of.
Yeah. That he was found guilty of, or not guilty of?
Found not guilty.
Okay. Yeah, I remember I called you. I was like, "Can you explain this to me? This sounds a little like..."
Yeah, we had a long talk about that. And look, I think, as someone who saw it, that there was a good case, but it's complicated in that relationships that, if you believe the testimony of the women, were abusive and controlling, leave a record that sometimes looks like they were consenting to it. Now, the government had responses to that made sense to me, saying, look, if you are in an abusive relationship and you know that no matter what you say, at the end of the night, there's going to be a freak off, maybe the 4th, 5th, 80th time when someone says, what do you want to do tonight? You cut to the chase and say, okay, let's have a freak off, right? But the jury obviously did not agree with the government's assessment of that. They saw these texts and video, you know, these texts of the women saying, like, you know, let's do this, or I had a great time, or, you know, whatever, and took it to read the texts literally, where the government sort of tried to add context of, like, look, they were in, you know, a relationship that was physically abusive, that was financially controlling, you know, all of this stuff. And that, you know, why don't you read the text with that in mind? And that argument did not win the day, let's say.
Right. You forgot the one charge, applesauce on cheeseburgers.
Right. Yes. Right. That should be illegal.
That's, yeah. I could have sworn I sent you a voice note, and because I'm just following the case. NBC News, you have the So Serious anchor talking about all these. Because I'm like, how is this a RICO? He's just making people put applesauce on cheeseburgers.
Right. I
like,
mean, look,
a lot of the violence.
Look, if you talk to personal assistants, right, for long enough, they're going to tell you some stuff like that. And there were a number of personal assistants brought in. Now, they were not brought in to talk about cheeseburgers. They were brought in to talk about a number of things, including, like, setting up for these hotel nights.
Right.
They were brought in to talk sometimes about procuring drugs or moving drugs, you know, again, according to their testimony. They were brought in to talk about working conditions that sometimes were really terrible, of, you know, multiple days without sleep, or, you know, trying to paint Combs as controlling in a way that I think the government would argue continued through his personal relationships and not just his work ones. So, you know, that's why they talked. But if you talk to a personal assistant long enough, you're going to get, you know, these kinds of things. He needed to have the toothpaste tubes facing out, you know, this with the labels facing out in every bathroom, this kind of stuff.
It just sounds like a spoiled rich brat. That
I mean, look, you said it, man. You said it. I did not.
Well, certain things like that, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if I want my toothpaste, make sure my pillow is fluffed.
I mean, look.
Read me a bedtime story. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look. One of these things is, you get the idea of, you know, alleged abusive behavior aside, you get the idea of what it's like to be a centimillionaire CEO, where, you know, the second you wake up, someone's there to remind you of what you have to do that day. Someone's in every room before you're in it to make sure it's exactly to your liking. Someone's at every meal to make sure you have your favorite condiments and you never have to like go without your favorite brand of ketchup, even if you're in a country or a continent that doesn't sell it. You know, so, you know, call that what you want, I guess. But yeah, that's the sort of life he was living. And in that respect, I don't know how different it is from any other sort of, you know, centimillionaire or billionaire CEO.
Yeah. Or your favorite pink drug, powder, you know?
Right. Right. 2C,
Yeah,
2C. Yeah.
I'll just for the audience, if for people who don't know, Tusi is very famous or originated from what my knowledge in Colombia, which I frequent too. But anyway, it
Oh
contains
wait,
fentanyl.
2C is okay. So you're the expert on this. Like, it seems
Okay.
like the way they described it at trial is 2C is just like basically any sort of powder stimulant dyed pink, and they call it 2C. Is that more or less?
Well, Vice did a good piece on this. It's on YouTube, and
Mhm.
it's supposed to be it contains the fentanyl and other mixtures of things, and people snort it.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
coke and some other stuff
It could be a whole batch
that are
of.
dyed
You should
pink.
watch. I'll send you a link to that Vice dog.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah,
probably be
please.
really interested to that.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, just there's a conversation. I interviewed a mutual, I guess, person that we know of, Dirk Parker, the hip hop cop.
Derek, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And something that came up in our conversation was that I think he made a great point was that if someone like him had testified who has somewhat prior relation, like I'm not sure, I guess, you know, they've had their run-in. He
Mhm.
has run-ins with Puff.
Oh yeah, you can. I've heard Derek talk plenty about the aftermath of the Club New York shooting and all this
Right.
stuff. And he had Jennifer Lopez in his car, and he
Yeah.
made sure Puffy, you know, got the treatment according someone his state of his station at the when he was arrested and all that stuff. Yep, we've heard the same stories from Derek, I'm sure.
Yeah, and also Derek, if for people who don't know, he works in the nightlife. You know, he does security
Hmm.
for the clubs, and how, you know, I know you're married, you're not frequently dating, so I know how some things you may not know how it is. Yeah, exactly. How dating it is for a young fella like me, or maybe like Diddy. So, and he made a great point how maybe a jury understood how certain women, when you meet certain women in this sort of lifestyle, how things become transactional. You know, if I, you know, if you sleep with me, or if I promised a trip here, I could get you I'll pay your rent, or I'll buy you a car.
I mean, look, you know, I don't. If that's your argument, you don't need Derek because they won, right?
Mm,
Uh, so you don't need more testimony on that. The
mhm,
jury, as far as we have every indication, you know, believe that. Uh, I tend to take put a lot of weight on the testimony of, you know, uh, Jane Doe and Cassie, and they both felt, you know, there were differences in their situations, but both of them felt like uh, they had been forced or lied to and tricked into these situations.
yeah. So with that being said, my question always will be like, okay, how come nobody went to the police?
Well, look, uh, I'm not in
Because
their heads,
yeah,
right? So that's one. Two is like, you know, there are a lot of abuse, you know, if you believe these women's testimony, right?
mhm,
Caveat with that. These were very complicated, controlling relationships, and you may not realize you can. Like uh how many comparable relationships do people go to the police in, right?
mhm,
Um, and there was various testimony about like, oh well, the police loved Diddy, right? Like he was pulled over and the cop, or you know, one of his employees was pulled over and put Diddy on the phone, and everything was great, and she got to go on with her life, right? So you know, you may not at the time have realized that something was a crime. Like there are lots of possibilities for why someone may not have gone to the police, particularly if you're in the context of what you believe is a romantic relationship and you do love the person, right?
Mhm.
In a lot of these situations, you don't necessarily want to see them in prison or have their reputations ruined or whatever. So, I think there are a lot of potential explanations for that. I think what Diddy's team would argue, what you're getting at is like, well, there was no criminal behavior, and it was only afterwards that they said, "I want a payday" and all of this stuff, right?
Right.
His team was very open about that being their argument, and on 2 of the 3 sort of buckets of charges, his team won the day. So, you can judge for yourself what maybe the jury took from all that.
Right. Because there was a lot of things. I mean, just like not because Cassie was also with another. I think she was assistant or an employee. She accused both her and Cassie. I can't think of her name. The other person's name accused. That they said on the stand that Diddy had raped them on
Yep.
occasion.
Mia is the other. Uh, that's a pseudonym. That's not her actual name. I would prefer, even if you know her name, not to say it.
Yeah.
On the video where I'm at. Same with Jane Doe. Um, uh, Mia said that Diddy sexually assaulted her so many times that ultimately she could only remember in detail a few of them, and a lot of the rest came in flashes.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So yes, absolutely. That was, and Cassie, as you correctly say, testified that Diddy raped her. This was sort of at a point after they had broken up, but had sort of a dinner together or whatever kind of thing, and it happened after
While she
that.
was still with her now husband.
Right. Well, I believe it was while she was with Alex. I'd have to double check the transcript and all that for
Yeah, because
that.
there was some talk about phone calls she had received before it, or maybe
So
during the.
so here's how that went down, and you can basically in Cassie's testimony, she and Diddy had sort of 2 encounters after they broke up. One of which was consensual, where she was dating Alex and Alex called in the middle of it and all this business. Uh, and then one that was this was Cassie's testimony. Diddy's take was there was only one encounter and it was consensual, and you wanted to cover that up for your husband, so you said it was, and then later some evidence came out where the timeline was weird, and so you made up this 2 different encounter story. This was Diddy's side's take on that whole business.
Right. Um. Yeah, it's a lot to take in because it's like, I guess, again, I feel like I'm gonna ask you questions that are kind of like are really, and I know you don't have a lot of time, that are kind of like self-explanatory. Oh, why wasn't he charged with? But
Sure.
I
I
guess
mean, look,
just like
I'm not a lawyer, so the details of that may be
yeah,
beyond me. But like certainly, I think for some of this stuff there was statute of limitations issues. Like
right,
the only reason Cassie was able to file her civil suit in the first place was because New York State, as sort of a kind of post Me Too situation, added a law where they said, look, for a limited amount of time, you can file civil suits against someone for alleged sexual assault, even if it happened a long time ago. You've got until X day to do it. And, that was when you saw a bunch of suits coming in. So, like, a lot of this stuff happened a long time ago. Yeah, so that may be why I don't know exactly, but that may be why there are no criminal charges about, individual incidents, let's say.
how awkward is it, or is it awkward to have your name, Sean, repeated on the.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was very strange to be there day after day and hear like Sean, 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 Sean. It's funny because they're spelled differently.
Yeah.
Somehow in my head it got twisted around to like, well, they couldn't possibly be talking about me. That's SEA, and even that doesn't make any sense, right? But
Right.
when you're there a long time, when you're there for 7 weeks, you got your head's got a lot of time to sort of play bizarre mind games. Let's say that.
Mind you, I just have 4 questions, about no more than 4 questions. I'll wrap up. I know you don't have a lot of time. What was I going to say? How tense was it during the when the jury was given the verdict? Can you describe that scene?
Yeah, I absolutely can describe this. The most of the people in the courtroom who were not journalists, right? There were sort of, if I can set the scene for you there, and you remember this personally, obviously, there's sort of 2 sides to the courtroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're facing the judge, the right side was press, and most of the sketch artists and that kind of stuff, and then the left side was the gallery, the public, right? That's more, and the YouTubers, because they often didn't have press passes, although some did. So the right side's people with press passes, and the left side is the public. Most of the people in public, on the public side, appeared to be supportive of Diddy in some way or another, whether they were fans or his family sat on that side, obviously.
Right.
So there was, when the verdict came back, remember the day before, the jury had sort of asked some questions, and it seemed like it wasn't going Diddy's way. He had his head on the table, his head in his hands, and
Wow.
it sort of seemed maybe like things weren't going so great for him. And so when it came back, there was a really, really tense moment. And so when the racketeering stuff came back not guilty, his sort of supporters were, no one shouted out or anything. You're not really allowed to, you'd been thrown out, but there was audible relief. But I think a lot of people maybe expected that the RICO stuff wouldn't fly. But when it came to the trafficking charges, when those were not guilty, there was audible exhalation and relief when those came out. Those are sort of the biggest ones, because I think those are the ones that sort of the most time, a lot of time was spent on, with the testimony of the alleged victims and all this kind of stuff. So that was the one where sort of his supporters were sort of the most audibly relieved.
Mm-hmm. Did you see him though? Did you see Diddy? And
yeah, absolutely. He was extremely happy, relieved.
Was he actually on the ground at one point?
He was at one point, yes. I forget if this happened exactly when this happened. This might have happened post-verdict. He had to like meet with his team, and he wanted to have a prayer session with his family and stuff. So yeah, in the immediate aftermath, he like dropped to the ground in prayer. And there is actually, I believe, courtroom sketches of that moment. Yeah. I absolutely saw that. He dropped to the ground in prayer and thanks.
I bet when the verdict came in, you could hear a rat piss on cotton, huh?
It was, his there were audible exhalations from, again, his supporters who were a little shocked, I think, at the sex trafficking stuff, and surprised. But yeah, it was very quiet. I mean, you can't clap or anything, right? Like you would be thrown out. So yeah, it was extremely quiet, and that the mood in there was really something. This was, of course, in contrast to how it was outside, where it turned into a block party.
Yeah, there was baby oil being thrown around.
I was, I don't know, a couple dozen feet away when that happened. That was really something.
Yeah. Because I'm pretty sure Diddy was hell of a relief, because I think if he was found guilty on the RICO, they could have, the government could have, I guess, obtained his company bad boy and everything he
I
being a goat.
mean, sure. Yeah. I mean,
Was
you
that true?
know probably as much as me about what the restitution might have been, but it would have been significant, and that there was obviously decades, if not life, uh, the potential for, I believe, up to life in prison for some of the charges, and now he's facing. I mean, look, we'll see what happens in October, and the government is going to push for 20 years, but or at least they were before the lead prosecutor got fired. Um, but I believe they're still going to push for 20 years. But he may get, I don't know, 2 years, something like that. If I had to guess, I don't know. Like it's
Yeah.
there is a possibility of him getting some additional prison time. There's also a possibility of time served and he leaves. We'll see what happens on October 3rd.
Mind you, what are the charges again? What are the charges he was found guilty of?
So it's 2 counts of sort of violating the Mann Act. So basically crossing state lines in service of prosecution.
So kind of being a John.
More or less, that is mostly how that law is used. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus, this is the first time probably some John has gotten 20 years, huh?
I mean, this
Or will get.
is Diddy's team's argument. They're saying, look, he wasn't even buying the sex for himself. The law is never used this way. This is ridiculous. Whatever. So that is their argument, that the law is being sort of interpreted in a very unusual way here to convict him.
Your personal opinion, do you think the judge hates or dislikes Diddy?
I think the judge went out of his way to be even-handed. Let's say that. I would say the judge certainly knew a lot of eyes were on him, and he let sides argue it out. And in fact, let Diddy's team argue even after they lost, and sometimes they would claw back 10 or 15% of what they lost. He let, during the course of the trial, he let everyone sort of have their day. I think where you're coming from is sort of in the aftermath, right? In the after the verdict. He said, well, look, this guy's violent. You admitted that, and we can't really let him out. He also said, well, look, given what he was convicted on, the rules say I can't let him out. So why are you even asking? So it's sort of like his opinion on the guy, to his mind, didn't even matter because the rules are the rules, and he had to be, locked up until sentencing.
Wow.
But yeah, he definitely said stuff afterwards to the effect of like, this is a violent person and et cetera. So I get, what you're asking, but I think the judge is, from what I saw over the course of the trial, went out of his way to extend courtesy to Combs in terms of like times with his lawyers and phone time and all of this stuff. And so, I think he was trying very hard to be even-handed.
Yeah, because you would think, okay, he got found guilty for the lesser charges. You would think, okay, boom, he could at least get out on bail until his sentence, but that didn't happen. You would think,
sure, you're right that did not happen. And again, the judge argued, the judge's decision was that was what the rules say. Even if I wanted to, I don't have any leverage on this. Part one, and part two, like, also, yes, he has a real bad temper and he beats people up, and you can't promise me that's not going to happen if I let him out on bail, was sort of the gist of his argument.
All right. That could happen when he gets set free, though.
Sure, that could happen. That could happen if he's sentenced to time served and released. But at that point, it's kind of no longer on.
Yeah.
At that point, you get into like, did he violate his supervised release and all this stuff, and it's sort of a different set of conditions.
Yeah, it's because after a while, honestly, it gets exhaustingly confusing.
Yes. Yeah, it's look, the legal system is very. There's a lot of decisions. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of like things people have to take into account. I certainly, am not, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I've certainly only gotten to understand stuff by reading and being in court. And there's a lot I don't get. Yeah, for sure. It's a extremely complicated system. And also, by the way, it was very interesting to see how the criminal justice system works for Sean Combs versus, I will, as a volunteer for an organization I work with, watch a lot of criminal arraignments, right? Just average. You got arrested on a Wednesday. You're going in front of a judge on a Thursday. Do you get bail or not? How much, right? That kind of stuff. And how those go versus, how a centimillionaire with the money for 7 or 8 lawyers go is also very informative, I think, about a lot in this country.
Yeah. Um, I had to ask about this. The tapes. I know
Mm-hmm.
you didn't. The media or anybody that was in the courtroom except for the jury weren't previewed. Were
Mm-hmm.
previewed to just the jury was privy to the tapes. I'm
Yep.
guessing again, like yourself. I'm pretty sure it was just consensual on these tapes.
Look,
Or
this is what I mean. Look, so as far as the actual tapes, right? The prosecution used them. They showed very short excerpts, and they said basically to show, look, these people were in this place at this time on this day. Look, you can see them on the tape, right? Was
Mhm.
as far as we could tell how they could use them. The defense used much longer excerpts, many minutes, I think up to 5 minutes at a time. And
Mhm.
we don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's because they wanted to show, look, here are people who appear to be doing things consensually or appear to be having a good time. Now, I think the prosecution would argue that, like, even in a situation where someone feels forced into something, they can feel like they have to show they're having a good time because there's the threat of violence, right? And certainly we
Mhm.
saw what happened when Cassie left a freak off before Diddy said it was over. That's the Intercontinental Hotel video. Um, and you can argue that even in a situation that's overall coercive and you don't want to be there, people are people and these things last for days. And maybe sometimes some aspects of it might have been pleasurable. That doesn't mean you weren't coerced into it or
Right.
tricked into it, right? Um, I think that it's a safe bet to think that this is sort of in line with how the prosecution interpreted it. So I think the defense used it in the same way they used the text, right? Here's literally what it says on the surface. Believe that. And the prosecution, I think tried to add context and talk about the overall relationship and the amount of control they said Diddy had. And apparently that did not get through to the jury.
Yeah. Do you remember the jury's reaction to those tapes? As far as like
Uh,
their facial reactions?
I mean, look, there you can, I think they were trying to not show a reaction, right?
Okay.
I think there was a lot of like some of them, if I remember right, may have just thrown looks of like to the person sitting next to them or something, but it was like no one looked disgusted or covering their eyes. I mean, they'd gotten plenty of warning about what was going on, and they knew that in some sense the eyes of the world were on them, right? So,
Right.
I think a lot of them tried their best to look stoic. Uh, there were other reporters there who were, had better observers of jurors than me. They might have written about it in some more detail. You could probably find that somewhere, but that was my memory.
Well, when the case wrapped up,
Mm-hmm.
it was a individual you had interviewed from Diddy's inner circle
Yep.
that went around and
Charlucci.
said,
Yep.
"Yeah, Frico is not a Rico."
Yep.
Um, I read your interview with him. It's a very great interview. It's one
Thank
thing
you.
to read it; it would be a hell of another thing to actually listen to it.
Yeah, it
It's
was it
because
was quite a it was quite a call. It was quite a call. I was very glad he was willing to talk to me, and I was glad he was willing to be so candid. And like, yeah, I mean, he said a lot of stuff that I think, people can sort of read and judge for themselves, what he said and sort of what that says about uh Combs and the rhetoric around him and the people around him. Sure.
well, correct me again. I'm just reading it. Again, if I was listening to it, maybe you could, maybe I'm just wrong, but it seemed, I wouldn't say hostile, but maybe there's some, okay, well, you two had kind of two different
There were some
outlooks.
tense moments. I mean, that's sort of I also viewed it as part of my gig to be like, to try to challenge him on some stuff. Some stuff I
Mm,
couldn't believe he was saying. Some stuff I kind of figured he might say and was ready to challenge it. That's sort of part of the gig. I would hope
right,
that in a lot of situations, I would try to ask tough questions of people I'm interviewing, and things that they might not expect, or that get sort of at the heart of what they think or what they're saying. A lot of his media appearances, and this is the nature of media a lot of times, is he only had a few minutes, right? That's often how TV works, is you have very short appearances. I had the luxury to be able
right,
to talk to him for sort of as long as I wanted. So that's
really,
I think what you're seeing. I mean, as long as he was willing. I didn't want to take up 7 hours of his time, but
right, 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 right. What are some of the things that you said that because you just said you couldn't believe what he was saying, or some of the things he was saying? What are those things? Can you elaborate?
I think the biggest one was, again, it's been a while since I look back at that conversation, but
Sure.
one of the biggest ones was sort of
Financial motivation.
there was that, right? Yes, the financial motivation, and also sort of the comparison he used of like, if I ask my wife to do a
Yeah.
favor for me,
Go to a grocery store or
go to the
something.
grocery store, and sort of comparing that to, uh, you know, these multiple day long sleepless drug fueled sessions with escorts. Those were some of the big things. Yeah.
Yeah. The, there was also talk of uh, well, Cassie got immunity. I want to like kind of recite
Oh
this.
yes, right. Of course, the Cassie immunity theory, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. He had this elaborate, untrue theory about immunity that doesn't make any sense. That it came in at some point that no one knew about and was super secret, and all of this stuff that like doesn't make any sense. But he really believes it. And if he does, I can only assume it made its way. It is likely to have made its way around to other Combs supporters.
The what? The reporters? I'm sorry.
Combs
Oh no.
supporters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I see it. I see that. I even see it with Vlad and his interview with academics. Because
Mhm.
Vlad said the same thing. Everybody thinks they're expert when it comes to the law. All of a sudden, when somebody gets arrested, so yeah, if Cassie got immunity. That's why she gets $30 million, gets to work, goes home happy. Um, if she did get immunity, how does I mean, would it be public? I mean, you're the guy, so you would know, no?
Yeah, I mean, look, if she got immunity, just like everyone else in that case who got immunity, she would say it in front of the courtroom. There were tons of people in that trial who I saw, uh, you know, plead the fifth when they were asked to testify, and then publicly got immunity deals and then testified. That happened multiple times. It would be no different.
So I have to ask this just to set the record straight. To your knowledge, and while you covered this trial, there was no talk of Cassie or any other women like the Jane Doe
Mhm.
that stated that you know of had immunity.
Correct. None of the alleged victims had immunity. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think that's about it.
All
I
right,
think
man.
that's
Look,
about it.
this was great. Happy to, again, happy to talk about this. I have an essay in the works about this that hopefully should be published on Complex sometime soon. So keep an eye out for that, about uh, you know abuse and abusive relationships and control,
Mhm.
and what connection that may or may not have to testimony we heard in the Combs trial. So I talked to some experts and read a very thick book that's in the other room for that. So I think that's, hopefully that will help shed some light on some aspects of this case that uh, will may help people make sense of it.
One day, can we? Do you think, or what? What is it like? The chance of we could hear the audio interview of you and Mr.
Of me and
that
Charlucci?
individual. Yeah.
You know
If
what?
that is just one, I'm telling you, it's one thing to read it, but it'd be a
Right.
hell of another thing to listen to it.
I'd have to check to see if it can be broadcast publicly and all that. That's above my pay grade. I have to figure that out to see whether I
Okay.
can share it with your folks. You
I
personally,
mean, it doesn't have to share with my
talk.
folks.
We'll talk on the side about that. But as
All
far
right,
as being
this is
broadcast on
yeah.
YouTube, I'm not sure. But yeah, sure, we can. You and I can talk about that privately.
Listen, if you want me to sign an NDA and just play it for me privately, I'll do that too. You know. All right. Well, listen, Sean. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for this.
For sure. Thank you, and thanks to everyone watching this. I hope it was helpful.